the International Indigenous Working Group on HIV and AIDS. And I had the distinct honor of serving on the Program Coordinating Board at the Joint United Nations Program on HIV and AIDS, affectionately known as UNAIDS. And as many of you may know, that UNAIDS might not have ever existed if it wasn't for the community response to HIV. And back in the early days, and even now sometimes, countries, leaders in countries were not interested in tackling HIV in a serious way. And it was portrayed, HIV in the media was portrayed as a joke, and no one cared. And it was the demonstrations of desperation that led to the kinds of responses we saw in the the late 80s and early 90s and right up till the modern day. But UNAIDS does not have the kind of funding that they need to achieve the targets in the fast track strategy. So on the Program Coordinating Board of UNAIDS, the NGO delegation, which has representation from the 5 global regions, encourages member states and UNAIDS, including the 11 UN co-sponsoring agencies of UNAIDS, to recognize Indigenous peoples as a key affected population and to help us to bring the world together, to work together to engender Indigenous-led responses where they don't exist and to support Indigenous-led responses where they do exist and bring us together and help us to generate the evidence that we need in order to have evidence-based responses. To understand the epidemics in the different countries where Indigenous people reside so that our response is targeted and evidence-based. Our next speaker doesn't really need an introduction. He's the executive director of UNAIDS, and I'd like you to help me welcome Michel Sidibé.
Come here to you. Thank you very much, Robert. It's always for me a pleasure and honor to have the chance to be introduced by you. I had this privilege in many occasions, and I want just to say, let me start by saying that I'm happy to start this conference, international conference in this room, because the reality is that the report I've been just launching last week, or I can even say this week, a few days back. We could not have a better illustration of this report than the interaction I will have with you today. Why? Because the report is saying exactly, or if I want to summarize, 3 words are critical in this report. The first is that closing the gaps. Closing the gaps is exactly about what we will be talking about here today. Because the reality is that Indigenous people have not been reached with our services. Or if they have been reached in very marginal way. The second word coming out of this report, which is very important, is about breaking barriers. And again, we need, and I like your title, is talking about building bridges, is about breaking barriers and making sure that at least people who are fortunate to be born on the right side of the road could have the possibility at least to build the bridge between them and the people who are in the other side of the road. And that will start also by uniting the strength of our effort, our communities, our Indigenous people together to be a strong voice and echo that voice. The last word, which was very important, which is also very relevant to today's discussion, and you will hear me all this week talking about those words, is writing injustices. And again, that you cannot, this report, we could have changed it and just say that is about indigenous people. I want to say that because honestly, any places, it could be from Chile to Canada to South Sudan to Mali to different parts of the places where I've been traveling, I can tell you that indigenous people across the world have long faced injustices and high unemployment. Educational system has never been designed for them, for helping them to create opportunities and transform that opportunities into something which can really be meaningful for their life. Poor housing in many places where I've been and living conditions are not appropriate. I saw also, I can say that higher levels of alcoholism, of course, incarceration and drug use. I can go on, but those are, we want, we don't want, is about those three things I was mentioning. We want, we don't want, is about the fact that in our society, we have, unfortunately, two types of approach in dealing with inequities. And that is, for me, something which is not acceptable, but which should not be just treated as only the problem of indigenous group. It should be a drive-by transformation in our society. It should be a societal issue. It should be central to leadership, to the political transformation. So that's why I want to say that data is even alarming. I was just showing structural barriers, but if you look at the data which we are having, when I was in Canada, I was shocked. I can say that I was shocked. Indigenous people represent about 4.3% of the total population, but 17% of tuberculosis cases in Canada in 2015 were among indigenous people. It is an opportunity. We will have a high-level meeting on tuberculosis for the first time. It's important for us to bring that together, to make sure that people can hear our voice there and hear us. I wrote a letter after my visit in Canada to the minister, to the prime minister, by even calling for a side event which could be jointly organized together to really put a light on this issue, to make sure that we can really say that it's not acceptable in 21st century that we have such a level of infection amongst our group. It's not just in Canada. In Venezuela, HIV prevalence among indigenous people has been reported up to 35%, amongst one group of men. 35%. So it is something we cannot just wait and produce report, having meetings. I decided to go to Saskatoon in Canada. It was a minus 45. And I can tell you, for someone coming from Mali, where you're used to 45 degrees, having minus 45, I said, oh my gosh. When I sent that to my grandchildren and my children, they said, oh, Dad, you are granddad, you are lucky. No one of us will have this experience. But I visited the 1 Arrow First National Reserve. It was just amazing. You cannot imagine. It was amazing because I saw people with resilience. I saw people with dignity. I saw people, who were not there to tell me, we are dying, No, they were a dignified people. People who were just trying to make the case for a change for their population. They were not there to say, Michel, Sidibé, no. I was so proud meeting those group of people. It was a short visit, of course, like they said in my village, they said that when you're visiting, you unfortunately always believe that you understood everything. But you know what I at least heard from people, I was listening a lot. It was, they were talking about structural barriers. They were talking about, all those policy choices which were standing in the way of their wealth and their well-being. It could be in economic forms, it could be on educational forms. And sometimes those educational reform were not, I should have said also New Zealand, because I met them, I should have said Australia also, because I met all those indigenous people on all those different places. But decisions taken by politicians were not sometimes done with a bad intention, but the outcome was not that. In Saskatoon, when I went, they were telling us they took the children and put them on those educational center, how they call it? Residential. So, but the reality, probably it was not that they wanted to do something to us, but the outcome was not good. You take people from their family, you put them, and then you don't give them a chance to remain a part of their society. So you don't bring the reform like you wanted to do. So what was shocking was honestly the disparity. And that's why I said it again, it's important to really right this injustice and make sure that we stop that. And it was also the fact that it was really shocking for me to see that they were talking about this multiple intergenerational trauma. And that is something I was feeling also in some places, in many places in my own continent. This intergenerational trauma, where young people are enrooted and don't know their identity from where they came from or where they are going. They are completely, in some occasion, lost by the situation which is around them. So we will never reach the sustainable goal. And I want to say that the MDGs goal or 2030 ending AIDS as a public health threat if we don't build an inclusive society. And I am so convinced on that one. If we don't reach, and I don't talk, since I came from Saskatoon, I don't talk even anymore about a fragile state. I'm talking about fragile communities. And those fragile communities, you find them from Baltimore to Bamako. And if we don't have the strategy which will help us to reach them in different ways, we'll never have stability. We will never have the possibility really to say that we have a world which is inclusive, which is designed to help us to end this epidemic we are all fighting for. But I want to stop here by saying that I'm calling on national government to implement the recommendation outlined in the UN Declaration on the Right of Indigenous Peoples, because that should be our foundation. We should live with that one, and we should fight to make that a reality for each of us. Again, let us say, to conclude, that we need to close the gaps. We need to break barriers, and we need to right injustice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michel.
I should have known.
Michel, we'd like to honor you with a blanket here. Don, if you could step down there, Don's wheelchair can't make it up here. I think you remember the blanketing ceremony from Ottawa.
He's got a collection of those,
Yes, he's got a collection now.
Okay. Yes. I trust it. Still there.
And hopefully, Michel will indulge us. If anybody who wants to get a picture with Michel Sidibé, please come to the stage after the blanketing, and we'll have a group shot for the record. Thank you, Michel Sidibé.
So we put the right over your right shoulder first.
Yes.
And over your left shoulder first. Send you off the good way.
Thank you very much.
Michel, would you mind a group photograph with the
Oh,
group?
yes.
Anyone who'd like to join?